Hundred Years' War began in 1337, a conflict born of dynastic ambition and territorial rivalry. Medieval England, under King Edward III, challenged the crown of medieval France, claiming legitimacy through his mother, a French princess. This war was not a single campaign, but a century-long struggle filled with truces, renewed battles, and shifting alliances. It shaped not only the destinies of kings, but also the identity of nations. At stake were not just crowns, but lands, pride, and power. The war would scar both kingdoms, draining treasuries and reshaping medieval warfare with new strategies and technologies. This was no short quarrel, it was a saga of generations. The roots of the 100 Years' War lay in the feudal system itself. The kings of England still held vast lands in France as dukes, vassals to the French crown. Yet Edward III refused to bow before King Philip VI of France. Pride and politics ignited the flame. The question of sovereignty over Gascony, a wealthy wine-producing region, further deepened the rivalry. The war was not only about kings, but also about merchants, soldiers, and farmers whose lives were drawn into the storm. What began as a dispute of inheritance soon turned into a clash that engulfed two nations, binding them in blood for more than a century. Medieval battles now erupted across the French countryside. English longbowmen, armed with the powerful yew bow, devastated French knights in heavy armor. At Crécy, in 1346, Edward III's army stood firm against waves of mounted chivalry. The French charged bravely, but arrows rained down like iron hail, piercing armor and pride alike. It was a new age of warfare. Discipline and ranged weapons outweighed the glory of knightly charges. The 100 Years' War revealed that the medieval battlefield was changing forever. France, though mighty, faced a humiliation that challenged its nobility's very foundation. The Black Death swept across Europe in the late 1340s, halting the 100 Years' War temporarily. Armies disbanded, villages emptied, and kings watched helplessly as death stalked both England and France. The plague killed peasants and princes alike, sparing no household. In this silence, the war paused, not from treaties, but from the grip of pestilence. The suffering weakened both kingdoms, leaving their economies shattered and their populations scarred. Yet once the plague shadow lifted, the kings returned to their quarrels. The war, like a beast, slumbered but did not die. The century-long conflict was far from over. The Battle of Poitiers in 1356 marked another devastating English victory. The Black Prince, son of Edward III, led his forces with cunning discipline. Outnumbered, the English again relied on the longbow. French knights, confident in their chivalric might, charged only to be ensnared by English tactics. King Joan II of France was captured on the field, humiliated, and taken to London in chains. His ransom crippled France financially, while English pride soared. The 100 Years' War became more than dynastic. It was now a struggle for survival, dignity, and the very soul of medieval France. France staggered after Poitiers. Nobles quarreled, Peasants revolted and brigands roamed the countryside. The Jacquerie uprising of 1358 revealed the people's desperation. Crushed beneath war taxes and feudal oppression, French peasants rose with fury. Yet the nobility responded with brutal suppression, drowning the rebellion in blood. The 100 Years' War was not only a clash of armies, but a tragedy for common folk. Their fields burned, their families displaced. They bore the heaviest burden of kings' ambitions. The war hollowed out medieval France, leaving scars that lasted generations. In 1360, the Treaty of Bretigny offered a fragile peace. France ceded vast territories, granting Edward III control over Aquitaine without homage. For a moment, it seemed the 100 Years' War had reached an uneasy conclusion. Yet peace built on humiliation rarely endured. Both kingdoms licked their wounds, rebuilt armies, and prepared for future conflict. The truce, though significant, was merely an intermission in a century-long tragedy. Behind the parchment and signatures, distrust simmered, and the embers of war still glowed beneath the surface.
When hostilities resumed, France found a savior in Charles V. Known as the Wise, he reformed finances, reorganized armies, and relied on capable commanders like Bertrand du Guesclin. Instead of open battles, France used guerrilla tactics, harassing English garrisons and reclaiming towns piece by piece. This shift marked a turning point in the 100 Years' War. France learned from past humiliations, adapting to new realities of medieval warfare. England, once dominant, now faced a resilient foe who refused to meet them on their chosen field.
By the late 14th century, exhaustion gripped both kingdoms. England wrestled with internal unrest as the peasants' revolt of 1381 shook the realm. France, though recovering, faced divisions between rival factions, the Armagnacs and Burgundians. The 100 Years' War became entangled in civil strife, politics, and shifting loyalties. What began as a war of crowns now spread into the fabric of society itself. The medieval world groaned under the weight of endless campaigns, and yet the fire of war still refused to die.
The war's third phase ignited in 1415 when Henry V of England invaded France. At Agincourt, his smaller force faced overwhelming odds. Mud, rain, and the deadly English longbow once again determined the fate of medieval battles. French knights, bogged down in the mire, fell beneath a storm of arrows. Thousands perished, and French pride lay shattered once more. Agincourt became one of the most famous English victories of the 100 Years' War, immortalized as a triumph of discipline over arrogance. Henry V's conquest seemed unstoppable, and France trembled.
After Agincourt, Henry V pressed deeper into France. By 1420, The Treaty of Troyes declared him heir to the French throne, disinheriting the Dauphin Charles. France seemed broken, its crown promised to an English king. Yet beneath the despair, resistance brewed. The French people still clung to their nation's soul, refusing to surrender completely. The 100 Years' War entered its most desperate phase, with France on the edge of collapse and England dreaming of a dual monarchy. History, however, had one last twist to reveal. In 1422, fate struck. Henry V died suddenly, leaving his infant son Henry VI as king. At the same time, Charles VI of France also passed away, leaving two fragile monarchs and two crowns claimed by rival factions. The 100 Years' War grew even more complex as regents and nobles vied for power. England controlled much of northern France, including Paris, but unity crumbled without Henry V's iron will. The fragile English dream of ruling France began to falter, even as their armies still held the field. Hope for France arrived in the most unlikely form, a peasant girl from Domremy, Joan of Arc. Claiming visions from saints, she inspired a demoralized nation. In 1429, she convinced the Dauphin Charles to trust her, leading an army to lift the siege of Orléans. Against all odds, Joan's faith and courage turned the tide. French soldiers, once broken, now rallied with renewed spirit. Joan of Arc became a living symbol of medieval France, piety, defiance, and destiny embodied in a single figure.
The victory at Orléans electrified France. Joan then escorted Charles to Reims, where he was crowned Charles VII in 1429. This coronation, carried out in the traditional cathedral of French kings, restored legitimacy to his claim. The 100 Years' War shifted dramatically. France now had both a crowned king and a saintly champion. Joan's presence united factions, rekindled faith, and revived national pride. For England, it was a bitter blow. The momentum of conquest now slipped from their grasp as France rose from near ruin. But Joan's triumph was short-lived. In 1430, she was captured by the Burgundians, allies of England. Sold to her enemies, she faced trial in Rouen under charges of heresy and witchcraft. The trial was political, designed to discredit both Joan and Charles VII. Despite her courage, Joan was condemned. In 1431, she was burned at the stake, her ashes cast into the Seine. Yet her death did not silence her story. Instead, it transformed her into a martyr, her spirit fueling French resistance more fiercely than ever. The years that followed saw France reclaim strength. Charles VII, once mocked as the King of Bourges, reformed his armies with permanent companies and artillery. Gunpowder weapons began reshaping medieval battles as cannons breached once impregnable castles. England, drained of men and money, struggled to maintain its hold. The balance tipped steadily toward France. Joan of Arc's sacrifice had not been in vain. Her martyrdom inspired reforms that turned France into a modern kingdom, prepared to expel its enemy. The Burgundian alliance finally shifted. In 1435, the Treaty of Arras reconciled Charles VII with the powerful Duchy of Burgundy. England, once dominant, now found itself isolated. French unity returned, while English commanders faced rebellion at home and dwindling support abroad. The 100 Years' War revealed the importance of diplomacy as much as battles. By severing England's alliances, France stripped its enemy of the political foundation that had sustained conquest for decades.
By the mid-15th century, French forces swept across Normandy and Aquitaine. Town after town fell as artillery crushed English defenses. In 1450, the Battle of Formigny broke English power in Normandy. 5 years later, Bordeaux, the last stronghold, surrendered after the Battle of Castillon in 1453. The 100 Years' War finally ended. England was left with only Calais, while France reclaimed its kingdom entire. What began as English ambition concluded with French triumph. The 100 Years' War reshaped both kingdoms. England, humiliated and impoverished, turned inward, soon descending into its own dynastic struggle, the Wars of the Roses. France, though scarred, emerged more united under a strengthened monarchy. Medieval warfare itself transformed. Longbows, gunpowder, and professional armies replaced the old chivalric codes. The war marked the twilight of knights and the dawn of nations. Identities hardened. England and France no longer feudal partners, but rival states destined to shape European history. Thus ended the saga of the 100 Years' War. For more than a century, medieval England and medieval France battled across fields, castles, and cities. From Crécy to Agincourt, from Poitiers to Castillon, the struggle defined the late Middle Ages. It was a war of kings, yet its legacy belonged to peoples, peasants, soldiers, and visionaries like Joan of Arc. The 100 Years' War left behind not only ruined lands, but also the seeds of modern Europe. Out of its fire emerged nations, forged in war, destined for centuries of rivalry and remembrance.